You are listening to And If Love Remains, a unique show spotlighting people, ideas, science, culture, and art. Your host, Mike Lovett.
Yes, Rachel, you are listening to And If Love Remains, and this is indeed your host, Mike Lovett, and I'm here with a special guest, Jack C. Ross. Welcome to the show, Jack. Glad you could be here today.
Thank you, Mike. It's great to be here. Coming out from a timely period of reflection. It's been a long time since I've been on the air, and had a radio program many years ago. So good to be back.
Yeah.
And thanks for inviting me here today.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Well, talk to me real quick before we get into current events and things going on now. Talk a little bit about your previous show. What did you do and your history with that?
Well, yeah, my show came about very interesting. I had no intentions actually at the time of creating a radio program, but so one thing led to another, as they say. The fascinating beginning of the story was I got a phone call one day from a brand new radio network, not a radio station. And this was back in the mid 90s. And they were creating what they called an alternative media format. And so anyway, this gentleman who at the time I believe was like the general manager called me up and said, "Do you want to do a radio show?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about? I've never done a radio show." And so one thing led to another, and he's like, "Well, we got our primetime guys Monday through Friday, or ladies. We're looking for people to fill in, and we've got spots in the evening, weekends." And so the fascinating thing at that time, I actually had a business partner, and we were providing some basically products and services. So I approached my partner and said, "Hey, this would be a great avenue. Let's do an infomercial for 30 minutes, marketing our products and services."
Yeah.
And so anyway, it was a real challenge, and it only lasted a few months, and we disbanded that because they were basically, this radio network was in the process of acquisition, of acquiring. Their goal at that time, I understand, was to acquire 50 to 60 stations in major markets through either complete acquisition or leasing. And so when you have, unfortunately, this type of programming, I shouldn't say unfortunately, but this alternative programming, they, it takes time to build up that listening audience.
Right.
And so, it's one of those things. I quickly figured out, if you have alternative talk radio, and it was formerly, hard rock, whatever it was, gospel radio, it takes quite a long time to build up the audience. But the good thing was they were thinking into the future. So they actually were broadcasting on the internet. I don't remember specifically all the details because at that point in time, I was very ignorant on internet and computers. And then they also did a little bit of satellite transmission. So I guess that was the early days of that.
Oh, wow.
And they, at that time, I don't recall exactly, but I think they were on 3 to 4 radio stations. So, that's how that came about. So what happened after a couple months, this infomercial program, we disbanded, and I went back to this GM and said, "Look, I'm done." He goes, "Oh, why don't you come back and do something else? What are you interested in? Do you got any hobbies, interests, etc.?" So one thing led to another, and at that time, I had spent about 4 years in some deep, serious research, and it was interesting because I'm a man that loves the truth. Now, of course, a lot of people talk about this. They say it's a perception of your truth, but I believe there's foundational truths. Bottom line, here's an example. If somebody drowns in the water, are you going to argue that they drowned in the water? So I
Right.
mean, it's just pure nonsense. This, misperception of truth. But that's how it all started. And then it was one of those things. I didn't decide suddenly, like, oh, let me join these organizations or groups that are alternative thinkers. But, I guess the best way to put it is I was always a little bit of out of the box thinker. So after doing this research for 4 years, and this gentleman came back to me and said, hey, why don't you do something you're interested in? I started to expose these things. And in simple terms, what it was I went back about 100 years in American history, which would be the late 1800s, that time, and just really discovered a lot of things, that information had been suppressed, covered up, and just like all things as we know today in this world, massive propaganda. I mean, it started, thousands of years ago, but exponentially, of course, that today has grown to, it's crazy what we see today. But
Yeah.
so anyway, I just decided to start exposing this and bring on very interesting guests. So it was a 1-hour program. So the format was basically, it's the first 30 minutes. We discuss this individual's latest book or information and research. So a little history and background on these folks I brought on my show. And then the last 30 minutes was a Q&A. So we had people actually call in. Not a lot of callers, of course, because we didn't have huge exposure at that time. But it was definitely exciting. So what happened, this is how it worked on my research and how I decided to bring somebody onto my show. It's very particular, very selective. And so I would find usually 3 people that had done research in a particular arena or topic. And then out of those 3, I would decide, hey, this is definitely the one I want on my show. And so I would actually pre-interview them. And a lot of these guests found this interesting because they said they were invited to many radio shows over the years, but they had never been pre-interviewed. And I'm like, man, I got to know who you are before I bring you on my show.
Right.
You got a great book, you got a great documentary video, whatever the case may be. And I was fortunate and blessed. One of the things that occurred during my research years leading up to the radio program was I met 2 key individuals that, and it's kind of interesting. One of these individuals I met out in the western part of the United States. I never met him in person. I was introduced to him, spoke to him on the phone, and he says to me, yeah, I've got 5,000 plus guests to bring on your show. I'm like, look, I'm not interested in all that. But he was a great contact. So he asked me, he said, well, what kind of people do you want on your show? What do you want to talk about? So we really narrowed it down, and he had some fascinating, people. And one of the interesting things, I'll just say this, I had, and I don't remember because it's very long ago now, we're going back, 25 plus years, but he kept bugging me about this lady. And this particular woman had her own women's publication at the time. And again, I don't remember what that was called. Very successful. She was also a journalist and a writer. And so I'm just going to share, Mike, real quick, this story, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
So what happened was he must have asked me, I'm not kidding you, 5 or 6 times, man, you got to have this lady. You got to bring her on your show. She's very interesting. So I said, okay. So finally I brought her on. And what happened was, and, Mike, people can, whatever you want to do, believe this story or not. Maybe you don't believe in dreams and visions. But what happened was, so when I had her on, she told me she had this dear close friend of hers call her up one time and said, hey, you've got to go to this next global meeting. And this was, of course, back, I believe, in the early 90s. And so this was one of these big, well-publicized UN meetings. And of course, they have them at different locations. They're not all in New York. But she's like, you got to go to this world meeting. I had a vision. I had a dream. And you need to find out. She's like, oh, I'm not going to this meeting. You're crazy. I have no interest in going to such an event. She's like, look, I'm telling you, I don't know what the reason is, but you need to go. And you need to find out what's going on. Came back from this meeting and called her friend and says, my gosh, I can't believe you talked me into this. It was a complete waste of time. That's just ridiculous. So how does this proceed? Her friend gets another vision, calls her back and says, look, I know you're not going to like this, but I got another vision. There's absolutely a reason you need to go to the next world, UN meeting. And she goes, I don't know exactly what it's all about and what you're going to discover, but there's something there. And I wish I could tell you more. She's like, oh, you're crazy. I'm not going to this meeting. I can't believe you convinced me the last time. So anyway, she ended up going, and somehow her friend, convinced her to go back. And second time around, she calls her friend. She's like, this is insanity. I cannot believe you actually convinced me 2 times to go to these world UN meetings. I mean, it's just staggering. I'm wasting my time. She goes, So this proceeds down the road. I guess I don't know exactly what the timeline was. And I'm assuming this is over a several-year period.
Right.
And her friend calls her in the middle of the night and says, I just woke up from this unbelievable vision and dream. She goes, you're going to have to go back to the next world meeting at the UN. And she goes, and I know this, and I promise you, you will discover why it is you need to be there and what you're going to learn. And she's like, you're just crazy. There's just no way you're convincing me of this. So somehow she did, and she went. And so, Mike, the reason I'm bringing this story up, because it kind of, goes back to how my show and what it was kind of about, the substance and foundation. And that was that she discovered that they speak in a secret language. So what do I mean by this? So, of course, the media is there, and the UN has their, headlines and, whatever it is, their key subjects or topics they're going to be speaking of. But she discovered that they speak in these misguided terms, if you will, intentionally. So you really do not know or understand what's going on in the world and what the agenda is of, in general, people call it the New World Order, UN, IMF, and the list goes on.
So let me make sure I understand what you're saying. When you say there's speaking in a secret language, what you really mean is, or what I hear you saying when you describe that is that, they're speaking in English,
Yep.
but they're using terms and such that either obfuscate or completely flip the meaning of what they're saying.
Well, in essence, yeah. So I'll give you another example. We have common law, which is fantastic. Common man can understand it. Then we have this thing called, law or legal,
Corporate law
corporate law, right? And so, interesting thing about the code of law is the code means secret. And think about this: if you ever have read submissions of trial documents, you're like, man, this stuff's so gibberish. How do I even understand and comprehend it? Well, this is because the lawyers in college are taught how to understand the code of law. And here's a simple example, and we'll go back to what we're talking about here in the UN, but in their speech. So what I mean by this is when you read a contract written by, let's say, your lawyer, and let's say it's whatever, 3 or 4 pages long, maybe it's 10, and you read that and you say to the lawyer, can you please explain this to me? I don't understand any of what this is saying. It just doesn't make sense. And that's intentionally done because that's why they created this code of law. So you don't understand it. And
Well, it's kind of like the old, Catholics, where they would say you can't have this Bible in English because
right.
You're unable to understand.
Yep.
You need the priest, basically. You need an authority to explain to you what the Bible is saying.
Right. And it's interesting you bring that up. I don't get too sidetracked here, but the original versions were written in Latin. That's what they actually spoke. And so they didn't want to even translate it to any other languages at that time. But so back to what I was saying. So if you've seen a legal contract and you understand, it's like insanity. It's because it's not written in common law to decipher and understand it. And that's why you go back to your lawyer. What does line 12 mean in section B or whatever it is? So how's that relative back to the UN? Basically, they're speaking in a coded language, intentionally designed. So you really do not understand the depth and meaning of what those meetings truly are about. So back to this lady who was doing this research and had her on our program. She discovered many things that they're, and basically the simple way is in secret in works in development. And of course, you and Mike have spoke about this many times. This has been going on for a very long time. So this is nothing new, unfortunately. And it's still going on today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of what propaganda is it's, putting something out there that is, either coded one way or the other,
right.
So that we get the intention of the elite. We get the intention of the propagandist, whoever that is, and not necessarily what it really is. It's obfuscating the truth.
And let's jump forward here. I admire what Elon Musk is doing because he's now revealed, substantial evidence and cover up of what the left-wing socialists were all about there, in suppressing information, removing information. So I would just say, Mike, to the audience that's listening, you can doubt and be a skeptic. That's fine. I have no problem with that. Do your due diligence and research. I always tell people, Michael, that when people come to me and they want to, you're one of those conspiracy theorists and, on and, whatever. Alex Jones is a lunatic. Here's the bottom line. Whether you like Elon Musk or not, or Alex Jones and all these guys, they're exposing things. They really are. And you can argue what their agendas are, and you can disagree with them, on their position, let's say whatever it is, politics, etc. But the great thing is they are exposing information. I had friends for years, going back to Alex Jones. It's a quick story. This is back in the 90s. I actually approached Alex Jones. He was in his early days, just like me, to actually come on my radio program. And so I spoke to whoever it was, his manager, booking manager, and so it never happened. I did finally get a phone call one day, but I had actually at this time ended my radio program. One of the reasons, there was quite a few, but I was actually moving and relocating. And I had been asked by another alternative network at the time down in the southern part of the United States to go back on the air and start doing my program. But that never happened for quite a few reasons. But she called me one day and said, "Hey, Alex, it's ready to come on your show." And I said, "Oh, sorry, I'm no longer on the air, but thank you for calling." So
Yeah.
Just
No,
very interesting,
I-
fascinating guests I did have on the program at that time.
I think you make a great point though, as far as like, sometimes we look at people for their agenda. We look at people as um like this holistic thing when in reality we have no idea. Like
Mhm.
we're guessing just like anybody else. But what we can do is we can see what they're actually doing and what is actually being shown. And you can say, okay, I don't care, who cares about James O'Keefe and Project Veritas and MSNBC? Like who cares about all those people? The Young Turks, I don't care. What I care about is what they're exposing, what they're talking about and whether that is actually happening.
Right.
And you can say, well, it's what's credible or not. Well, I hear you, but when the exposure is something like Twitter feeds or actual videotape that hasn't been changed, like you can't change those facts. You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
like and it's fine. You can try to explain them. Like I would love for somebody to explain some of the stuff that Project Veritas has exposed. Like please just explain it to me and I'll disregard it. But it's always an attack the messenger kind of a thing, and
Yeah.
I don't buy that.
Right. Yep.
So
Well, the thing is, and this, where I was talking about earlier in my show, and this is the thing, Mike, I've discovered. Most people in general, and I understand this, aren't willing to actually do their due diligence and research. And for me, I've always been the kind of guy. I'm not interested in having some 1 hour marathon debate with you, right?
yeah,
And you're showing me your evidence, and I'm showing you yours. That's just not me. I'm not interested in that personally. But what I do say to people when what do we call it? Made fun of me, mocked me about this stuff is I'm like, look, just do your own research. And look, if you've got something of interest you've discovered, particularly writings, let me know. I'm interested and I'll take a look at it. I've got an open mind. And that's the fascinating thing about this world. There's many things to research and learn. And I think it's, something that you need to continue doing as time changes and evolves. And, the reality is, I may not like the things in the world today in many aspects or respects, but, I have a foundation spiritually that's got me grounded. And I just try to stay focused and stay on track and not be sidetracked. And one thing, the reason I bring this up, Mike, is because so many people I believe today are just totally distracted by media. And it's almost to me, it's childish, and like I have friends of mine that are, what do we call it, deep into politics. And, they're always saying, oh, Washington's having these hearings and it's another hearing. And I'm like, yeah, but nothing ever happens. It's a dog and pony show.
right.
I'm like, stop wasting your time even paying attention to that nonsense because nothing actually comes out of it. What am I talking about? There's no indictments. There's no criminal charges. Nobody's getting prosecuted. Nobody's going to jail. Well, in simple terms, nobody is being held accountable. Now, there are rare circumstances. And, unfortunately, in most cases, it's just a, scapegoat. So the actual people at the top never get prosecuted.
And that's the thing. We all know that. Like it's not a big secret. We know who the actual instigators are.
Mm-hmm.
And we also, it's not even a question, but obviously, in our system of laws, you have to prove it.
Right.
But I think, it doesn't change the fact, like these people, just because you can't prove that somebody did something illegal doesn't mean that maybe they should, be our senator or our congressman.
Well,
there's a difference there, but unfortunately and this is why I've come to believe that I'm not sure, like we can this is gonna here's some controversy on And If Love Remains. I'm not sure if you can depend on the election system. I'm not sure you could depend on democracy or republic or whatever you want to call the system of government that we have, whether you call it a constitutional republic or a democracy. I don't think we can trust it anymore because you can't trust the vote. You can't trust the people when they get into office, even if it was a free and fair vote. And they're painting so outside the Constitution lines that I don't even know what the Constitution means anymore. There is no limiting factor on any law, organization, or agency in the government anymore.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important, Mike, what you're talking about here is, there's foundational truth. And that is the amazing thing about our Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, all those great documents. They're just simple foundational truths, and a wonderful guidance to live by and abide by. Does that mean you're going to agree on everything? Probably not. That's okay. But, it's just like today, people want to argue about this stuff, and I call it foundational truth. And I'm like, so you're saying let's just throw all the dictionaries out, let's throw out the, proven science, mathematical equations for engineering, building stuff, like even rockets that go into space. I mean, it's amazing how delusional people are today. I mean, it's staggering. It really is. They don't even care anymore about the truth. But Mike, we can get another discussion another time when it comes to socialism, fascism, communism, and how these tactics and propaganda is being used today. I mean, it's amazing.
And I would like to get with that on you. I want to ask you one more question, and then we're gonna have to break it off. But what do you think, in your opinion? We talk about a foundation of truth. Where does that foundation of truth come from? How can people find? Where does that foundation of truth come from, in your opinion?
Well, I think it comes from our Creator, and our Creator, spoke this into Scripture, and people could say, oh, I don't believe in all that. And that's the great thing about our Heavenly Father. He's given you a free will. You can decide to accept the truth or deny the truth.
See, God is a voluntarist too.
Yeah, yeah. That's a
voluntary organization.
That's what's amazing about His love for us. Gave us a free will, and He's not going to control us. So, but that's where the foundational truth comes from.
And I think if you lose that sight, that's where everything starts to fall apart.
Yeah,
absolutely. Everything becomes relative. Everything becomes like there's nothing rock solid to hold on to anymore.
Right. I'll just tell you a quick story. I had this is many years ago now. I was given at that time a cassette tape of a gentleman, and he was, I believe, he was a surveyor, an archaeologist, or something of that nature, and he was an atheist, and so he went to the Middle East for a year's mission to prove that everything recorded in Scripture was inaccurate and wrong, and more specifically in the Old Testament, there's a lot of references there. So he was so frustrated, the accuracy, he invested another year, 2 years, trying to prove there was contradictions in the Bible, in these references. And so anyway, fascinating story. He decided to become, a follower of Yeshua, the Christ, the Messiah, the Redeemer. And I'm not sure if he's actually born again, as Jesus tells us we must be. But so anyway, interesting.
Wow.
So what that really tells me, Mike, is this, very quick, because I know we're going to wrap up here, but he at least was open-minded to do his research and due diligence, which I said earlier, it takes time and energy. And if you're not willing to put that in and you're just going to believe all the nonsense and lying, deceptive propaganda out there, then you're going to be living in, unfortunately, what I call a delusional reality.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so too. Well, Jack C. Ross, I appreciate you being on the show. This has been a lot of fun for me.
Yeah.
We got to do it again. You promise to come back on?
I will.
Awesome.
For sure.
Jack, thanks a lot. You are listening to And If Love Remains.
You are listening to And If Love Remains.
The first of 23 installments requested by Dr. Levitt. Trying to be in compliance here because we're taking him and that whole organization